Chapter 32. With the cracked open pinecone in his hand, the glistening acid staring back at him like a malevolent creature, he didn't dare break eye contact with it. Mira breathed heavy over the comms.
"The shit that ate Nero is inside that pinecone?"
she asked. Yes, Corporal, he said. Not much, but enough. Carb cursed.
"And the pinecone didn't dissolve? How's that possible?"
Dickerson shook his head. I don't know. I only know what I'm looking at.
"Well!"
Carb yelled.
"Get rid of it!"
He continued staring at the liquid substance, watching the way his suit lights made it dazzle like diamonds or sunlight on ice. It hasn't done anything, he said, although I sure as hell don't trust it.
"No shit,"
Carb said.
"You'd be an idiot if you did." "Dickerson,"
Mira said.
"lower it to the deck and leave it there."
Ah, Corporal, he said. But he didn't want to. It was like the small cylinder he'd found on the hull before the skiff marooned them on Mira. That strange find had called to him in some way, as if the indentations on its surface were an alien script, the first message from life forms beyond Sol system. It was important. He knew it. And the pinecone? Something told him that was important too. The liquid in the shell, the acid, it was from something. Whatever had cracked open his body shook with fear and dawning realization. Oh shit, Dickerson said. Shit, shit, shit.
"What?"
Carb asked.
"Did it move?"
No, he said, and placed the pinecone upside down so its exposed inner shell faced the deck. If the acid shit was going to bleed out, at least it would do so on the Atmos steel instead of his squad mates.
"What's wrong, Dickerson?"
Mira asked.
"You get some on you?"
He looked up at her. I think I know what that acid is. Not being able to see her expression was driving him mad.
"So, okay, what is it?"
He rose from his crouch and shined his suit lights at the other two objects floating near Mira. The two pine cones were split down the center, just as the one at his feet had been. The acid, he said. I think it's used to crack open the pine cone things.
"Used?"
Carb asked.
"By what? I mean, what would—"
Her sentence died in her throat, replaced by a groan.
"You telling me you think something's eating these things?"
He nodded. Yeah, I do.
"You have got to be kidding me,"
Mira said. I'm not. Dickerson gestured to the other two. Something cracked these guys open, and something left the acid. I can't imagine the two things aren't related.
"I'm quitting the Marines after this shit,"
Elliot said in a dazed, groggy voice. Still maglocked to Carb, he might have been floating in and out of consciousness for all Dickerson knew.
"What do we do now?"
Carb asked. Dickerson opened his mouth to reply, but Mira responded instantly.
"We get our asses to the bridge. If there's a way to contact S&R Black, it has to be there, or on the way."
Carb sighed.
"Ah, Corporal. And stay the hell away from any pine cones,"
Mira said. Copy that, Dickerson said, drawing out the words in a thick Texas drawl.
"Watch our six, Dickerson."
Aye, Corporal. He hung back and waited for Mira to continue down the hallway. Carb stepped ahead of him, dragging Elliot above the deck plate as easily as a mother with a newborn. With Mira's suit lights cutting the darkness 5 meters ahead, he felt as though he were walking through a tunnel. No matter how bright their lights seemed, the darkness was simply too complete, too suffocating, to permit all but the barest illumination. It didn't help that Mira's metal walls reflected almost no light. The ship's interior might as well have been deep space. The pine cones, the damned pine cones. The cargo bay was filled with them. They'd come across well over a dozen living and dead ones, been attacked by several, and they still didn't have much of a clue as to what they were. Except they were alive. He knew that much. When they'd first seen the things pursue them through the medical bay, he thought it possible they were machines. Perhaps created by aliens deep in the galaxy, or shit, one system over. But after seeing the dead ones cracked open like metal walnuts, he no longer believed it. If they were machines, the dead ones would at least have some remnant of their non-biological origin. Instead, their shells were more like a carapace, surrounding something that had, at the very least, instincts and habits. To him, that indicated life, even if they didn't understand how that life worked, or the materials from which the creatures were made. They knew electricity hurt the things, practically made them explode. Couple that with the CO2 leaks, or maybe oxygen from the humans wandering their new home. It implied something. He just wasn't sure what. Not only that, but how did the buggers move? They'd reminded him of the cephalopods he'd seen at the Dallas Aquarium, the way the creatures ingested water before squirting it out of an orifice to give them thrust against the deep ocean currents. But in space, what could they possibly be ingesting to then transform its energy into movement? Has to be gas, he said to himself.
What did you say, Dickerson?
Nothing, Corporal, he said. He checked his HUD's rearview camera. The suit lights on his back cast the same baleful glow as his helmet light. Against the darkness, they managed only to create shadows, but at least he didn't see insubstantial shades following them. They were clear for the moment. They crossed another set of intersections, Kalimura calling a halt and clearing both starboard and port before continuing forward. After the corporal and Karb continued down the long, seemingly endless hallway, he trained his light to starboard and scanned the hall. There were doors down there, one on each side. He flipped to check port and found the same. Curious, he quickly mag-walked out of formation and shined his lights on the first door. A bright green label said R. Michaels. Dickerson blinked at it and then grinned. Corporal?
Go,
Kalimura said. She sounded tense. He braced himself for a disciplinary tirade. That last intersection? One of the doors on the starboard side had a crew member label on it. I'm guessing these are the quarters.
Damn it, Dickerson, get back in formation.
Aye, Corporal, he said. He quickly moved out of the starboard hall and hurried to catch up with his squad. He brought up the schematics to confirm his hunch, but the majority of the areas were without labels. They were on the second level of the foredecks. That's all he knew. After resuming formation, he tried to concentrate on making sure nothing was creeping up behind them, as well as providing cover fire for Kalimura if something jumped at her. Constantly switching between the two views was exhausting. Either that, or the ever-present fear of the dark was finally getting to him. He didn't want to know which one it was. Another intersection. They were 10 meters from the next slip point. Once they reached it, he knew Kalimura's plan was to take them to the bridge. If, that was, they could get there. He didn't step out of formation, but he did pause to shine the light down the adjoining corridors, looking for hatches. Once again, he found at least one. It was wide and just off the hall. What he wouldn't give for Mira to have her power back on so he could explore. Then again, he wasn't sure he'd like what he'd find. No trailing pine cones, no insidious shapes floating and bobbing like ocean buoys in the ZG. They had made it to the slip point without a problem. Kalimura halted for a moment and scanned the 3-meter-wide hole in the wall. She crouch-walked to the edge and shined her light first down into the bowels of the ship and then upward.
Okay, squad, we're clear. For the moment.
Rest for a sec? Dickerson asked. His headache was on the verge of coming back. He knew his nannies must be struggling to repair all the damage done when the skiff lost control. His back and shoulders hurt as though wrenched by an invisible, malevolent hand.
Yeah,
Karb said.
I wasn't planning on mag-walking this many kilos today.
Kalimura seemed to crumple slightly.
Okay, good idea.
She walked to the wall and mag-locked herself to it, standing as straight as she could.
We'll take a couple.
Karb gently led Elliot to the wall and secured him before pulling herself to the floor. She sat cross-legged and locked herself next to him, rifle cradled in her lap. Dickerson bent at the waist and tried to touch his toes. The suit was pliant enough to get him most of the way there, but balked a few millimeters from making contact with the boots. Still, his back thanked him. He stifled a groan of pleasure, stood, and raised his arms as high as they would go. Well, that's better, he said aloud. Kalimura chuckled.
Too much crouch walking, big guy.
No shit, Dickerson said. How are you holding up, Corporal?
Fine,
she said.
Not exactly the longest mag walk I've ever done. Really?
Karb asked.
What was the longest? 7 km in one day,
she said. Karb whistled.
That's quite a hike.
Dickerson shook his head. Where the hell did you walk that distance?
Trident Station,
Kalimura said.
SFMC Search and Rescue had to help the engineers perform a walk to check for damage on the hull. That was after a tower blew out. That sounds fun,
Elliot said in a drowsy voice.
How did you get that duty?
Duty. Elliot had said the word as though Kelly Mora had been sworn to do someone else's job.
You know how it is.
Kelly Mora said.
Boots do what boots do,
She said.
You were a recruit?
Carb asked. Kelly Mora grunted.
Aye, fresh out. 4 of us escorting engineers in our combat suits while they floated around on ZG Waldos and portable scanning arrays.
She let out something that might have been a curse.
Bastards wouldn't even skiff us.
Dickerson said nothing. He couldn't imagine Mag walking 7 kilometers. During the satellite war and his S&R missions, the most he'd clocked in was 2 km at best. That didn't mean he hadn't racked up a ton of distance in his years in the Corps, just not all at once. The squad fell silent for a moment, leaving Dickerson alone with his thoughts and the sound of his breathing and heartbeat. He peered at the slip point opening. It yawned like the mouth of a great black beast. If they had enough light, they'd be able to see all the way down to the lowest deck as well as to the highest. But he knew Kelly Moore's lights had only penetrated a few meters of darkness before petering out into a useless glow. 7 decks, Dickerson said after consulting the schematics.
Yes,
Kelly Moore agreed with a yawn.
7 decks before we reach the bridge. At least we won't need to fool the biometric scanner to get in,
Carb said. Dickerson smiled. Small favors, he said with a laugh. No idea what Mira's AI would do if it was still functional. 43 years without human contact? Damn thing might go insane.
Very well might,
Kelly Mora said.
Doesn't matter. The ship has been without power for a very long time. I'm willing to bet the AI folded shortly after the human crew did.
But did it? Dickerson wondered about that. The records he found in the medical bay indicated the ship had at least been functional long after SF-Gov claimed it had been lost. So what had happened here? Another moment of silence. He closed his eyes and let himself float within his own personal darkness.
Saddle up, squad,
Kelly Moore said. Dickerson blinked. His chronometer showed 5 minutes had passed. He wondered briefly if he had fallen asleep. He guessed he had. Stifling a yawn, he checked his rifle and walked to stand in front of Carb. Her helmet looked up at him. Smiling, he offered her a hand. Carb took it and he raised her off the floor with ease, letting go just as she reoriented her feet and maglocked to the deck.
Elliot?
Carb asked.
How are you?
The injured Marine loosed a long, loud yawn.
Was fine until your voice hurt my ears. Fuck you,
she said, but she was laughing.
I should make you walk. We all know you're just slacking.
Elliot raised his arm with the missing hand.
Yeah, just slacking.
No one said a word. Carb detached him from the wall and once again hoisted his body over her shoulder, his legs floating behind her. Kelly Mora was already standing at the slip point's threshold. She cleared both directions again.
6 decks,
she said.
Thrust slow. Be careful of obstacles. And if you see anything moving, and I mean anything, you let the entire squad know.
Ah, Dickerson said, unsurprised when both Elliot and Carb echoed his response. When they formed up behind Kelly Mora, she walked through the entryway and floated into nothing. Her suit jets burned for an instant, and she was flying upward. Dickerson waited his turn, hoping like hell there was a functional comm array somewhere above them.